You lazily open your eyes one morning, roll over to check your smartphone, and freeze. Though your bank account balance is still intact, your dollars can't cover the same groceries they did yesterday. While that seems like a nightmare, headlines are already warning about the dollar's decline. In 2024, BRICS countries amped up discussions on creating the unit, a new gold-backed currency they want to be the reserve. Meanwhile, U.S. debt is skyrocketing, and whispers of a post-dollar world are increasingly getting louder.
The first ever BRICS summit is getting underway in Russia.
Investors are moving away from the US dollar.
US stocks and the dollar plunged again on Monday as
Lost over 10% of its value in the last 6 months.
A step towards the group's aim of breaking the dominance of the US dollar on global trade.
We get this policy wrong, China could be overtaking the United States.
Imagine this. You walk into a coffee shop in China, pull out your phone to pay, and even though the local currency is the Chinese yuan, the beans you're sipping were priced in USD on the global market. But it's not only in China. The same thing applies if you're buying gas for your car in Berlin or buying an iPhone in London. Without even realizing it, you are living inside the shadow of the dollar. In fact, as of 2024, 58% of all foreign exchange reserves were held in dollars. Oil prices, regardless of whether the oil is from Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, or any other country, are all priced in dollars. And if your country wants to borrow money, whether it's Turkey, Argentina, or Sri Lanka, those debts are often denominated in dollars. That means that the dollar is not just the US's problem, but the world's. When the US Federal Reserve increases interest rates, they don't just impact Wall Street. Mortgages in Europe, food prices in Africa, and corporate debt in Asia all feel the aftershock. No matter where you are, your life is tied to the American dollar, a currency you neither print nor vote on. So, how did the dollar come to matter more than any other currency? Here's the story. After World War II, the world needed stability more than anything. So, in July 1944, 44 nations met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, where they agreed to peg their currencies to the US dollar. The US dollar itself was then pegged to gold, and since the US had more than 2/3 of the world's gold reserves at the time, the idea made sense. The literal gold bars were actually stacked in Fort Knox. However, after about 3 decades, in 1971, then US President Richard Nixon shocked the entire world by unilaterally ending the gold standard. At the time, the US was grappling with inflation while also funding the Vietnam War, meaning excess dollars were being held in foreign central banks. But here's where it gets interesting. The US dollar didn't crumble even though it was just paper from that moment on. It still had momentum and, more importantly, power. Things got even better between 1974 and 1975 thanks to a series of negotiations and understandings between the US and Saudi Arabia, leading to the petrodollar deal. Under this arrangement, the US agreed to provide Saudi Arabia with security, and in exchange, Saudi Arabia agreed that its oil would only be sold in dollars. This move effectively tied the world's most important resource to the US dollar, forcing other countries to hold dollars just to purchase oil. But with time, cracks would begin to emerge, and more problems would come the dollar's way. The first issue is the US government debt. In 1980, the US owed $908 billion, but as of 2024, that debt has ballooned to over $34.4 trillion. To put that into perspective, every US citizen, including a newborn, owes $100,000. The worst part, that number is only going up, seeing as the US national debt rises by $1 trillion about every 100 days. Another problem is inflation. In the 1970s, US citizens lined up at gas stations for hours as inflation rose, hitting 14% in 1980. American households couldn't keep up with the cost of living, forcing the Federal Reserve to impose record-high interest rates to restore confidence in the dollar. That worked for a moment, but in 2008, the financial crisis happened, sending shockwaves around the world. Banks went under, housing markets collapsed, and Washington responded with unprecedented bailouts and stimulus spending. Trillions were directed into the system to halt the bleeding. But just when things seemed to be under control, COVID-19 happened. Literally, overnight, the US printed more than $5 trillion in relief programs, flooding the economy with dollars. Of course, this didn't escape notice. While the intention was good, To keep households and businesses afloat, inflation soon surged to levels not witnessed in 40 years. Groceries, gas, and rent prices jumped faster than wages could keep up. There's also the politics issue. From government shutdowns and debt ceiling standoffs to the January 6th insurrection and more, the American image is increasingly becoming shaky. And when America's stability is put in question, the world doesn't buy dollars. But as we speak, it's no longer about simply not buying dollars. The dollar is now battling an outright revolt. In 2024, the BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, continued discussions on a plan to create a gold-backed currency known as the unit as a US dollar alternative. Russia's President Vladimir Putin even appeared on stage holding a prototype of the note. Speaking of Russia, the country is already cut off from Western financial systems for invading Ukraine. It has now shifted most of its trade to the Chinese yuan. And China, on its part, has actually openly discussed settling oil trade in yuan instead of dollars with, wait for it, Saudi Arabia. Central banks have also waged an outright war on the dollar. In 2022 alone, they purchased 1,136 tons of gold, the most in 73 years. The reason? Gold isn't dependent on the Federal Reserve or US politics. However, even as America is busy trying to convince central banks that the dollar is still worthy of the Iron Throne of global finance, another storm is brewing elsewhere. Only this one isn't as quiet or as slow. Digital currencies. Digital currencies, including cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and central bank digital currencies, otherwise known as CBDCs, which include China's digital yuan, are the new kids on the block. And they're whispering, what if we didn't need the dollar anymore? The thing is, unlike the dollar system, which relies on old-school banking systems and SWIFT, digital currencies promise instant global transactions. No middlemen, no delays, and more importantly, no expensive fees. This kind of makes the dollar look a little outdated. Blockchain technology, which is the backbone of many digital currencies, offers countries something tempting: the chance to build financial systems that don't depend on the US. The digital yuan, which promises digital trade routes, fast payments, and fewer ties to the US system, has already launched in several pilot regions, reaching millions of people. If enough countries adopt it for trade, it could essentially chip away at the dollar's dominance. Meanwhile, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have built a cult following as the people's money because they offer freedom from government control. Even more interesting is that American tech giants are endorsing the trends. Remember Facebook's Libra, later rebranded to Diem? It made enough waves to catch the government's attention. And let's just say, regulators weren't happy. Still, companies like PayPal and Square are adding crypto as part of their payment options, hinting at where the future of payments might go. The real kicker? It's only now that the US has started talking about the possibility of a digital dollar. This takes us back to the real pressing question. So when could the dollar actually die? Imagine waking up one morning and the first thing you see on your screen is dollar no longer world's reserve. And everything from your morning coffee to your mortgage jumps almost overnight. Unfortunately, this isn't a script from some dystopian movie, but one of the many scenarios that could actually become a reality if or when the dollar falls off its throne. The good news is that many experts believe that the fall won't be a single crash, but rather a gradual tumble, kind of like how the British pound once ruled global trade, but lost its reserve status slowly after World War II. Today, the pound accounts for just 5% of the global currency reserves. According to the International Monetary Fund, the dollar's share of global reserves dropped to 57.7% in the first quarter of 2025, the lowest in over 25 years. That said, a more realistic death clock for the dollar would be, in 10 years, BRICS grows stronger and expands its local currency trade. Meanwhile, the petrodollar starts to weaken as Saudi Arabia experiments with the yuan. In about 15 to 20 years, central bank digital currencies and crypto become mainstream, shrinking the dollar's dominance in payments. America's debt keeps climbing. political dysfunction continues and rivals grow even stronger. Finally, in 30 to 50 years, the dollar may lose reserve status entirely. Still, shocks are possible. A sudden geopolitical crisis could drive countries to ditch the dollar overnight. So, let's assume you live to see the dollar's fall from grace. Now, what would everyday life look like in a post-dollar world? The dollar has grown progressively weaker over the last couple of decades. Today, you'd need nearly 4 times as much money to buy the same goods and services as you would in the 80s. This is the magic of inflation, forever digging away at your money's value. But inflation is slow and can be controlled by adjusting interest rates to keep it manageable. However, in a post-dollar apocalypse, the shock would be instant, as prices for a lot of everyday things would pretty much skyrocket. From electronics made in China to clothes stitched in Bangladesh, a lot of average Americans rely on cheap imports, and unfortunately, a weaker dollar makes them all pricier. But it doesn't end there. Borrowing will also get more expensive since a weaker dollar will push lenders' interest rates up. Finally, with inflation already outpacing salary growth, a weakened dollar will only worsen wage struggles. But only for the average workers, as the wealthy will have gold, real estate, and other financial instruments to shield themselves. So it's not just about geopolitics. The aftershock will trickle right down to your wallet. On the bright side, some skeptics argue that de-dollarization isn't going to happen soon, because the US still has the deepest financial markets, the most trusted military, and global powerhouses built around its currency. The key question now is there a ready replacement? What do you think? Drop your views in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe.